to this very interesting panel discussion on green anodes, making Europe a leader in low carbon batteries. I'm Megan Richards. I'm a senior advisor here at Root Pedersen in Brussels. We have an excellent panel here to discuss this issue. Peter Handley from the European Commission, who's the head of unit of energy intensive industries and raw materials. Anna Michelle Asimakopoulou, who is a member of the European Parliament from Greece. Vincenzo Conforte, who's the head of public affairs from ABB, who will be joining us shortly. He's stuck in traffic, but he'll be here any moment. And Mark Thompson, who is the founder and CEO of Talga Industries. So I want to first put this in context because many of you, there's Vincenzo, many of you will have followed the discussions at COP26 in Glasgow. You will have seen how important it is, not just in Europe, but to the world as a whole, to make sure that this clean energy transition goes forward quickly and efficiently and effectively. We in Europe have, of course, a lot of progress that has been made already with the Clean Energy for All Europeans package, now the Fit for 55 legislative package. We're going to talk about that in a little more detail, particularly in the context of how we can make clean and sustainable batteries more efficient and more effective, and how we can make them in Europe and make sure that we encourage energy security in Europe and progress in this direction. Then, of course, in the context of COP26, there has been a very interesting declaration of accelerating the transition to 100% zero emission cars and vans. This is one of the important declarations that came out of COP26. You will have seen perhaps that Sweden as a country signed up to that declaration, ABB signed up to the declaration, and Volvo signed up to that declaration, which are some of the interested parties in this discussion. And of course, to make sure that this clean energy transition takes place, one of the factors that we have to take into consideration is making sure that we have new sources of sustainable, secure batteries to make sure that those electric vehicles can operate effectively without limiting our access to the critical raw materials that are necessary to go into the vehicles. Some of you may have seen the International Energy Agency, recent report from May this year on the role of critical raw materials in the clean energy transition. And you will have seen that the IEA shows how important graphite, for example, is in the clean energy transition, and in particular in e-vehicles, because in order to have sufficient numbers of e-vehicles, we're going to need more critical raw materials, and graphite is one of the important critical raw materials that are needed. And those of you who've been following the Raw Materials Week that the European Commission has been sponsoring last week and in part this week will have seen that the third raw material scoreboard has been published by the Joint Research Centre and DG GROW, which is where Peter is from. And that report shows clearly how important it is to have access to sustainable and secure raw materials to make sure that this clean energy transition goes forward in a sustainable and effective way. And of course, the European Parliament has had an own initiative report on the role of critical raw materials. We're expecting to have a vote, I believe, on Wednesday, but Anna Michelle Asimakopoulou will tell us all about that when she speaks. So the reason I want to emphasize all those aspects is because Talga, which is one of the companies here going to speak to us, Mark Thompson is the founder and CEO of Talga, is going to tell us about how their project and their activities have such an important role in making sure this progression towards clean, sustainable, and effective e-vehicles can take place in Europe, and also meet what I think are some of the basic fundamentals of what we call the energy union in Europe. And those 5 principles of the energy union are security, of energy supply. And in this context, security of critical raw materials for the production of batteries is a very important part. The internal market, the internal energy market, and again, the same goes in this context for making sure the internal energy market is sustained. The production of renewables, again, better use of renewable electricity, the use of energy efficiency, and again, electric vehicles are particularly energy efficient, and of course, competitiveness. So we want to develop and push forward these actions within Europe. So that's enough from me. I'm going to pass the floor over to Anna-Michelle Esemopoupoulou, who is a member of the European Parliament. Anna-Michelle, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about the European Parliament's position and the own initiative report. Please go ahead.
Sure. Hi, Megan. Thank you very much. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be on this very distinguished panel. Nice to see you, Peter. How are you, Mark, Vincenzo? Looking forward to today's discussion. I just want to start out by explaining, why I'm involved in this, even though, I'm from a member state that doesn't have that much to do with it. But I have to say that, in recent times, we've had really plenty of opportunities to reconsider what we truly consider to be critical. And here in the Parliament, it's clear that for us, the Green Deal is critical because we understand that we need to deal with the inevitable consequences of climate change and of global warming. We understand that it's critical to deal with the transition to the digital age after this fourth industrial revolution and the disruptions it's caused. We understand that it's critical to deal with the consequences of COVID and future pandemics. So it's very clear to me, at least now, that we can't deal with any of these critical matters without critical raw materials. We need critical raw materials like lithium for batteries, like magnesium for lightweight vehicle concepts, like graphite and permanent magnets for electric vehicles, for wind turbines, for communication devices. I think, quite frankly, very few people realize how many critical raw materials are in their mobile phones, which are now a part of our daily life. So it's critical, in my opinion, that we reduce our reliance on a handful of non-EU countries and that we support sustainable investments that involve European and global partners and SMEs as part of a long-term international sourcing strategy. We need to take back control of our critical material supply chains, and we need to control waste streams and exports of waste products. So that's just as an introduction to just tell you that I think that it's very important, and this is what the Parliament's report is all about, the fact that we need to realize that critical raw materials are, let's say today, more critical than ever, and clearly we need to act accordingly. Now, just to give you an opinion, an idea of where we are on this, this is a report which was produced by ITRE, and I was the rapporteur for the INTA opinion to the report. So I looked at the trade aspects of this. We had a debate on this last night. We're voting on amendments and on the entire report. And just to give you an idea of what's happening leading up to the final vote tomorrow, one of the key votes that has been put from my group, the European People's Party, has to do with paragraph 70, and this has to do with mining in protected areas like Natura 2000 sites, where there has been a request from certain groups to ban it entirely. And my group is asking for these areas to remain tightly restricted, and of course for there to be thorough environmental impact assessment when it comes to mining there, but we don't want a strict ban. And this is so important to us that we've turned this into a key vote, which will lead to us, I think, most likely not voting against the final report, but perhaps abstaining from the report. This would be an unfortunate outcome, let's say, because I think we all need to support it, but I do hope that we'll win this key vote. This just to give you some background. But in closing, let me just say that we understand very clearly that, and of course support this concept of the circular economy and all the benefits that come out from that, but we also understand that it's not enough. So if it's not enough, that means that we need to focus on domestic supply sources wherever this is possible. And in fact, within the European Union, I think much greater chances for these domestic supply sources to also live up to the standards, values, any way you want to put it, that we adhere to and focus on as a European Union and of course as a European Parliament. So having said that, I'm very much looking forward to hearing about this, this particular topic. This isn't a topic that's easy for most people to grasp and understand. When I say, oh, I'm speaking at a green anodes carbon battery, this is not exactly the kind of thing that makes Twitter, jump out at you. But I think that if we, as policymakers, find a way, like if I were saying that, you might not have a phone, you might not be able to find a cell phone, then people would, probably stand up and listen. So in order for us not to reach the point where I actually have to say that, I'm delighted that we're having this discussion today and look forward to my participation. So thank you, Megan.
Thank you very much. And you make an important point, as many important points, but one in particular I want to emphasize, and that is the role of the circular economy and recycling. And of course, recycling is excellent and we want to do as much as we possibly can. But if we're going to grow the number of e-vehicles that we need in the future, we can't do that without new sources. And since we have some sources right here in Europe, we want to make sure that those are used in the best possible way. And of course, Mark is going to tell us all about their wonderful project in Sweden. And we don't want to get into the situation that we had in importing energy from a single source that we've had in the past, when we've seen the kind of problems that can arise as a result of that. So diversity and domestic production is really important. Peter, that's a perfect way to bring on to your contribution to this as well. Peter Handley is the head, as I said, of unit in DG GROW in the European Commission that looks after energy intensive industry and raw materials. Peter, can I pass the floor to you, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Megan, and it's very nice to see everybody here this morning. I think the first thing I'd like to say is just what a hot topic critical raw materials have become this year particularly. We had a G7 discussion about it, we had a G20 discussion about it, and indeed at the end of October, President Biden convened a side meeting to talk about supply chain disruption and the importance of understanding what's happening to the critical raw material value chains. This afternoon, in fact, I'm sitting down with the Americans under the new Trade and Technology Council to have a working group discussion about how we can cooperate bilaterally around this subject. So there's a lot going on. You asked me to say a word about Raw Materials Week. We were very pleased it's almost over. You actually are an event in Raw Materials Week still. We had a very good conference on the Wednesday, and Anna Michelle was one of our key speakers there. We looked at the importance of critical raw materials for the Green Deal, as you have yourself said, Megan. We looked at the strategic dependencies aspect, and that's where Anna Michelle was speaking very eloquently last week. We looked at the role of innovation and emerging technologies, and then we also looked at the investment dimension of the issues, and all of these are keeping us very busy at the moment. I think I would recommend that people take a look at the speeches from yesterday evening's debate in the European Parliament. The speech by the rapporteur Hildegard Bentele was very clear, and one point that came out very clearly to me is we really have to get on top of the narrative if we're to carry the public opinion with us on the importance of balancing how we supply our industrial value chains, because we will need to balance diversifying externally with doing more domestically. We'll have to balance how much we can do through boosting circularity with how do we actually do primary activities if we need to do them. Now, as far as battery raw materials are concerned, I think it's interesting that everyone focuses on the cathodes. They focus on the lithium, they focus on the cobalt and the nickel. Hardly anybody talks about the other piece you need in the battery, which is the anode, right? So I think it's very welcome that you have this event this morning. In fact, last night in his speech to the European Parliament, my commissioner Thierry Breton he referred to the batteries area, and he talked about we've allowed ourselves to become overly dependent on other countries for the things which are of strategic importance to us. He referenced rare earths, he referenced magnesium, I'll come back to that, and he referenced lithium and graphite, right? So graphite is part of our area of concern. And therefore, we're very interested that there are possibilities to extract and refine in a clean way natural graphite in the European Union, because at the moment, we're basically very dependent on what China produces, and China's processes for producing are carbon intensive, right? So it kind of slightly devalues the green credentials of the battery unless we can do better. And I think it's also important to draw attention to the work we've been doing with member states, with industry, and with civil society stakeholders to spell out the way we expect raw material activities to be carried out in the European Union. In September, we published European Principles for Sustainable Raw Materials. And this sets out a set of principles backed up in each case by how we apply them through European and national regulation on exactly how we expect to take care of workers, safety, local community rights, the environmental protection, greenhouse gas emissions, and a number of other key principles as well. And we're strongly encouraging any company that wishes to operate in the raw materials value chain in the European Union to sign up to these principles. This is one way to provide reassurance that there is definitely a capacity to do the raw materials activities inside the European Union in a responsible and sustainable way. And if you go and look at the speech from Mrs. Benteler, she actually talks about it in a way as a kind of moral responsibility, that we do not outsource all the emissions and the management of raw material extraction to countries that may be less able to cope with them than we are ourselves. So I think I would certainly subscribe to that principle. And with that, I close. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Peter. And this brings me now to Vincenzo. Vincenzo, perhaps you can tell us from the perspective of ABB, how the development of new batteries and the use of critical raw materials in Europe will help your activities, and where you see the potential for new developments in this area. And then we'll come on to Mark, who's going to find a solution for all of us.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Peter, Mark, and Anna Michelle. I mean, for inviting me also to this discussion. I think, you know, for ABB, it is not a new subject. I mean, ABB has been involved in mining for 130 years, and over 130 years, we've seen an industry, especially in the big north, and in Sweden, Finland, evolve. You know, battery is just another iteration of the process that, you know, let's say the hurdle race that we're running to keep mining in Europe and to make mining a different, a better, a more sustainable activity in Europe. Batteries are critical because, you know, ABB is a company that addresses mostly two things: electrification and automation. And in this world, we need batteries to do both. You know, robotics needs batteries. You know, electric cars need batteries. Hoists and trolleys need batteries. So virtually, probably over 2/3 of what we do need some kind of storage in the form of batteries. And batteries are at the beginning of an incredible growth, not just in volumes, but also in technology. We see denser batteries and also a more varied type of batteries that will enter the market soon. But there is one element that remains the same, and is the fact that raw material supply, as Peter and Michelle also said, remains to be deficient. And if we were to electrify all cars today, you know, only passenger cars, without even looking at commercial vehicles, we just simply wouldn't have enough batteries for it, and wouldn't have enough raw materials for it. And the second element, which is the sustainability aspect, you know, there is a price premium in going electric. And if someone pays a 20 to 25% price premium on an electric car, they don't want to feel responsible for emissions that happen upstream. They don't want, you know, this investment they made in the future to be tainted by life cycle assessment that is not exactly bulletproof. And this is where also, you know, I think ABB's value proposition really is. I mean, ABB today is committed to the electrification and automation of mining, because 7% of global emissions, CO2 emissions, are in mining. They're mostly energy related, and we can mostly do away with them with electrification. If you electrify one single mining truck, you remove 1,000 tons of CO2 per year, which is what 46,000 trees absorb in a year. So it's not insignificant. At COP26, the biggest and most exciting, let's say, product that I've seen was a mining truck, you know, built by Volvo with, you know, with green steel, with carbon, net carbon steel. So, you know, I think there is a lot that we can do. I think electrification is at the core and center of it, both for acceptability, but also, you know, to be just with consumers who are paying more to have a green product. And I think batteries are, you know, one of the elements where in Europe we can show a new way. We can, you know, provide our value added by making batteries a little bit better from an environmental perspective.
Thank you, Vincenzo. I am one of those consumers who's happy to pay a little bit more to have an electric vehicle, but I want to make sure it's sustainable, it works perfectly, the battery is not going to fall apart, etc. And so I appreciate very much your concern. I also saw last week some of the new Volvo electric trucks, which are, I'm not that I'm making a plug for Volvo specifically, but some of the arguments have always been made that electricity is good for light duty electric vehicles, but not for the heavy duty ones or medium size ones. But you've seen all these new heavy duty electrified vehicles. And also, as you say, if they're made from green steel, this is another advantage.
Heavy duty is not a hard to abate sector anymore, luckily.
Exactly. So let's come to the kernel of our discussion, and I'm going to pass the floor to Mark Thompson, who's the CEO and founder of Talga. Mark, you are at the forefront of a new and dynamic activity that's going to help us develop an even better battery production and development in Europe. If I'm not mistaken, Talga was involved also in the graphene project that was a flagship project that was developed and financed by the European Commission's research project. And I think one of the interesting elements of that huge research investment was identifying some practical applications of the outcome of that project. So can I pass the floor to you and tell us a bit about what Talga is doing and how it fits so perfectly into this
Sure. Thanks, Megan, and thanks everyone. It's great to see you and have this forum, especially during Raw Materials Week. And as Peter and Anna Michelle mentioned about these fantastic events around the world where this is starting to come to the fore, where the realization is that the supply chains that have been so disrupted are also the currently existing supply chains are actually quite dirty, should we say, from an environmental point of view. We can do better. And there is such a strong interest now in taking responsibility for these materials instead of just accidentally just continuing to use them in our phones, our laptops, in our cars, and looking at that more closely, which is the subject of how can we do that more sustainably and how can we support solutions for those if they exist. How can we identify them and how can we support them and make sure that, you know, we're not just dare I say greenwashing, we're actually taking real actions to make things happen and improve the world, not just within the European sphere, but ultimately the atmosphere for which we all share. For us, our journey into that began from, you're right, actually, we were associate members or are associate members of the Graphene Flagship. So we've from working in graphene as a two-dimensional nanomaterial made from graphite, we bring a lot of innovation to that world. And it was in some ways, and I shouldn't say easy, batteries are actually not easy. They're extremely difficult. They're like Rubik cubes of chemistry and commerce. And but certainly it prepared us to focus on Europe in particular and understand the supply chains, understand the raw materials, and sort of link them all together and integrate it from the mine through the processing into the final consumer product. And with that background, we now bring that to the world of batteries. And in the world of batteries, you have, as Peter mentioned earlier, half of the battery is essentially being ignored at the moment, where everyone's talking about lithium, cobalt, copper, nickel, things like that, manganese, etc. on the cathode side, and the media, of course, is largely behind that. But half of all the battery active materials is graphite, and will continue to be. The World Bank has identified that the graphite supplies within Europe need to grow by nearly 400% by 2050 for everyone to reach the electrification goals, and that's seen as a conservative estimate. Currently, Europe imports basically 100% of its needs for batteries from predominantly from Asia. And even if you're making an electric car or a battery within Europe, the materials for it are still being imported. So the current way of making this material is using petroleum, different fossil fuel products, using usually very unsustainable electricity, using fossil fuel powered electricity. And then you have these very long diesel powered supply chains. So you have shipping and a lot of handling, of a lot of complexity and a lot of inefficiency. So it doesn't really take much of a deep look to see that the current supply chains are all unsustainable. They're not ideal strategically for Europe. They're not ideal for the consumer. They're not ideal for the company's ability to build the products the consumers expect to be clean. And it's not very sustainable from I guess, with these targets of the European Union that exist. And that's why we're very proud today. Actually, we've just announced today that Talga has committed and signed up to the EU principles on sustainable raw materials as one of our primary platforms of sustainability in our project. So we certainly are happy to stand with those principles up front and back those up, as we do with a lot of our other sustainability practices we bring anyway, where we bring usually the cutting edge of whatever we can across this industry. So we're very, very proud to get involved with that. Essentially what we propose is something that Europe can actually deliver, which is, in the world of anodes, it has the graphite sources to actually make itself fairly sustainable in lithium-ion battery anodes. So that's half of the active materials can be produced within Europe. They can be mined sustainably by using very high-grade resources. You can have a very small footprint project. You choose to use the ones that are in the least sensitive areas, should we say, and that have the highest principles and practices applied to them. The amount of material that you're shifting is the smallest possible, then being used with sustainable power, in this case in Sweden, hydroelectricity, so 100% sustainable power to process that material and to keep control of the downstream. So value add, don't just have a raw material, but actually do all of the processing in-house to produce a material that can be used by a battery maker or a battery cell maker, and that can all be done within the EU. And by controlling that, you can optimize it. And with our partners, actually, we do have a partnership with ABB, and with the assistance of their technology and their same principles that we're talking about here of innovative mining, innovative processing, innovative manufacturing. You can, it's not just talking about it, you can set this up. There's a plan, the resources are there, the power is there, the very short transport chains are there, the workforce is there, the jobs will be created in these areas that currently are doing things like iron ore, copper mining, forestry, basic logging, and you can set up these newer, shall we say, higher technology jobs in these remote regions and basically retrain the workforce into this future of a different, a much more powerful use of minerals within the European sphere, where you're decreasing the emissions of the entire supply chain and making it better and probably lower costs at the same time. So in a nutshell, that's what we're proposing, and we have sort of proven that it can work from our studies and from what we've built and from what we've designed. We've recently completed actually a Hitachi ABB life cycle assessment that showed a decrease of emissions by 96%, with still more to go compared to the incoming material that's currently in your electric vehicles now. So there's a very sound basis for the opportunity. The questions that then remain are, well, how can Europe make sure these things happen? Because I think there's a window for these to happen, and if you don't get them done commercially, you'll continue to import materials, and it'll be extremely hard to wean yourself off or to stop, being addicted to those imported issues, which currently people are doing now. This isn't the future. Your current existing battery supply chains are that imported material now. That will just continue, and it will grow massively. And that's Europe's decision, I think, coming up is, how much does it really want to have autonomy and have a cleaner supply chain? What's it willing to do to help make that happen?
Thank you very much, Mark. A couple of points I want to come back to you on and to raise with the others as well. One important element in battery production, I understand, is that you don't want to have to move batteries from, well, let's say from one end of Europe to the other end, and you don't want to have to, because they're very heavy, that adds to the emissions, unless of course you're using an EV truck, I suppose. So you want to make sure that where you have your source of graphite, you also are producing the batteries within the shortest possible space. So that's one aspect that you and Vincenzo could perhaps speak to. And the other, which is very important, and I'm sure both Peter and Anna Michelle will want to comment on this, is the importance of job production. One thing that the Commission has mentioned many times, and many others too, is that the clean energy transition must also, and it will, create a lot of new jobs. And this is part of the sustainable development of the clean energy transition. We see in Europe, for example, I mean, the last time I looked, I think there were about 4 million jobs created in the clean energy sector, not just renewables, but clean energy overall. That includes energy efficiency, et cetera. And I'm sure that number has increased in recent times. So perhaps in that context, the others could speak to those points. But I want to come back also to you, Mark, to ask you, what do you need in addition to what you have now to make sure that this project gets off the ground? What can the Parliament do for you? What can the European Commission do for you? What does Sweden need to do in terms of permitting? Are there any other things that are holding you back, or is there anything holding you back in moving forward with this very interesting and dynamic project?
Do you want me to speak to that first, or shall we go around on that other issues first? Well, on the, I guess, certainly on the job side, we certainly see this as a very positive job creator across different sectors. From it's not just mining, it's the processing and the downstream, the refining of the chemicals for the batteries should all be done locally. Certainly from a customer point of view, we speak to some very large battery customers that would prefer, or in fact demand, that the supply is within 48 hours delivery of their cell manufacturing. So that's obviously impossible when bringing materials in from Asia, and yet that is what is required to have the most robust supply chain. Yes, I agree, it should be as clean as possible. I think batteries, they don't travel well together in big packs, shall we say. They like to, there's a lot of rules and regulations around safety of big amounts of lithium-ion batteries being transported. The quantity of batteries that would have to be on ships floating around at any given time. We've seen some numbers in the multiple billions of dollars worth of batteries in stock floating on the ocean, waiting to try and get into Europe. because it cannot be just that the packages have to be broken down in smaller amounts. The ships are diesel powered. So yeah, with us being in Sweden and we can electric rail directly down into customers' locations directly from Sweden with no shipping is a big plus, and fast delivery times into customers as well. So from whether it's us in the Nordic region in Sweden or whether it's or elsewhere within Europe, it obviously makes a lot of sense going forward to have those local supplies. I think the things that hold us back are certainly the permitting times in Europe is renowned to be very slow. It only takes several years to build a battery factory, but it can take up to 10 years to build a new mine, for example. And the downstream processing component, those things are also quite lengthy to permit, and new places are not normally built that often in Europe. They're predominantly recycling old ones. So certainly the speed of bureaucracy to deal with issues is a big thing. The standards are very high, as they should be, environmentally and in every other form of ESG. But certainly there seems to be a slowness to take responsibility for decisions and make things happen or not commercially. If the answer is no, that's fine, but make it a quick no so everyone can move on and make something happen somewhere else. So permitting is obviously a big issue. Finance is available within Europe. I think there's a lot of innovation funds and things that are available and are very well done in Europe compared to anywhere else. I think Europe has world-leading network of the entire the green network, as it were. I think the Green Deal is a fantastic sort of network that encompasses a lot of things that will support groups. I think I'm a little bit also these tariffs are possible. The EU passed battery passport, looking at setting up CO2 based tariffs or emissions tariffs on imported materials. That's also a great initiative that will help support local European production. Although I would be wary of lobbying by various groups to try and extend the times on that. I think you want to implement that as quickly as you can. So I think the main issue is that the battery cell manufacturers themselves are also quite new within Europe. Currently, a lot of them are just they're manufacturing by assembling batteries. They're not actually making all the components there, but that's happening quite rapidly. So I would say that the main issues are around policies and bureaucracy, red and green tape across Europe, across the EU, and also in Sweden, and maybe a lack of connection between the local domestic governance in places like Sweden and the overall EU, which may have a set of principles, and it wants to drive this new economy and to drive these critical materials to be made locally. But what influence do they have, or how does the local governance, how can they respond to that if they're feeling separate?
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Very clear. Anna Michelle, can I come to you, because I think this is an important area, the link between policy making and the local conditions. How can companies like Talga, ABB, etc., who are really at the cusp of new innovative technologies which are helping to push forward the clean energy transition, how can they be helped to either get permitting done quickly or get rapid answers? How can the European Parliament and EU legislation and policy making help them progress?
Well, Megan, I mean, I guess, we can try and harmonize stuff as much as possible and push the Commission, to come up with proposals, and then, try and Peter basically talked about this narrative that we need to build in general. I think that a positive political narrative behind this would go a long way in incentivizing rules that would deal with many of these issues and these impediments that Mark mentioned, which anybody, I can speak to you from the elected politicians' perspective. I mean, these issues in local communities can get quite passionate, as everybody knows, and that can definitely influence policymakers locally, and then that influences policymakers, at a European level. So everybody, I guess, has to look at their own angle so that they can find their own contribution. So, it's reasonable that I would look at the angle of what you can do to get policymakers to be much more vocal in putting forth a positive narrative around these things. And the obviously the key elements of that are linking it to the Green Deal, linking it to achieving these targets that we're all behind, linking it to the digital transition, and making it more, let's say, easily understandable to the simple citizen. And I don't know, Peter, I think you mentioned Hildegard Bentele's, moral plea. I think that goes a long way. I mean, yes, of course, this is what we want, but when you if you explain to people that you outsource this carbon footprint, then that brings about these sort of, moral sense of in people too. It's the same thing as child labor. You don't buy garments that are produced with child labor, so you don't want a phone that's being produced with that leaves a bigger carbon footprint than the one that you're actually advocating within the EU. These are the types of things that we need to all get behind. Now, I totally understand, Mark, that, obviously local government, I've been a local politician, I've been a mayor, I've been a national parliamentarian, and now I'm a Euro parliamentarian. I can tell you that, the higher up you move in the food chain of politicians, the easier it gets, because you're not as close to the citizens not knocking. I mean, I don't have anybody knocking on my door here in Strasbourg right now. Whereas when I was a mayor, and when there was I remember we were trying to do a network for fiber optics, and I had people outside knocking down my door, shepherds who were saying that if you put fiber optics, all my sheep are going to die, and I had to explain this to them. So, when you're working locally, you need different types of political narrative building, but certainly the European Union, I mean, everybody who co-legislates can help build a positive umbrella around this, just like we've done for the Green Deal or for the digital transition. I think that could be our most important contribution. Otherwise, we're largely, like I am on this panel, sort of decorative figures in the whole thing. So.
You're also decorative, but you're fundamental to our panel, Anna Michelle. But I think also an important element for local politicians must be the number of jobs that are created. Good, solid, sustainable jobs. This must be, I suppose, an important element also for local people. Peter, what about you? From the Commission, how are you going to help push forward these aspects?
I would like to come in on the jobs thing, because everyone thinks that these batteries are just going to make themselves, right? Provided you have the raw materials, you have an energy system, who's going to build them, right? So in fact, people are the key critical resource here, right? People with the skills. Just a few days ago, I was reading that Northvolt, which is not a million miles away from where Talga is operating, is trying to attract 10,000 people up to the north of Sweden with all sorts of benefits and cultural activities and housing and stuff, because they need the people, right? And they want to train the people in these new technologies. And that's the kind of model we need to do. We need to really incentivize people wanting to come to remote regions, or people to stay in, let's say, coal regions, which are over the next few years going to be moving out of coal. But you've got people with engineering, with mining, with processing, with recycling experience. It's an open goal to say, well, let's try and change a coal miner into someone who can be a very skilled and well-paid person in the new businesses which are emerging in the same regions, right? So I think the jobs angle is absolutely fundamental here, because if I was in a local community and something was going to happen nearby, it would be my second question. My first would be, is there going to be anything that affects me negatively? Is it going to make my house price go down in value? But also, will this give a job to my kids when they grow up? You know, that kind of thing. So I would just want to stop on that jobs aspect for now.
Vincenzo, anything to add to that part of the discussion?
I mean, I think, you know, it's also important to stress that these are good jobs. These are, you know, good engineering jobs, well-paid jobs that are also sort of future-proof. You know, we're not, you know, in a position to tell people to go down shafts, you know, hundreds of meters away like we did in the 19th century. I mean, these are highly technologically advanced jobs that also create a value chain around them. You know, universities, you know, push for innovation. You know, digital innovations happening in startups around them. I mean, when ABB started working with Northvolt, I mean, in 2017, it was the first investment that ABB made in Northvolt. You know, there was very little about, you know, creating batteries in northern Sweden back in the days. Now there are over 400 startups working in the battery sector in Sweden alone, which is enormous in what, you know, less than 5 years. So I believe that, you know, there is a domino effect, a positive domino effect in you know, creating new space for new entrepreneurship, space for, you know, innovation in a sector that is ultimately critical. And the other element is to take into account is that you know, the minds have changed. And a lot of people are, you know, in their heads, they have, you know, 19th century minds and the impact that those minds had back in the days, or even, you know, 1950s. We don't have to go back all that far. But, you know, if people could see what a modern mind look today, you know, a lot of the NIMBY effect will already disappear. And if people could see the jobs that this kind of minds, or the kind of value chain that they create these days, you know, I think a lot of the you know, the resistance will also fade away. But I can only, you know, echo what Mark said about, you know, planning and permitting. I mean, this is a crucial area that, you know, that Europe should look into. And in terms of the acceptability, I believe we should also try to make life cycle assessments valuable for people. You know, having a label that is easily recognizable and that makes sure that, you know, if you buy, you know, a car that can be, you know, let's say any car, you know, whether, you know, over their life cycle, you know, they are an A, a B, a C, or an F.
Great, thanks, Vincenzo. As someone whose grandfather died in a coal sorry, did you hear me at all? I was just saying, as someone whose grandfather died in a coal mine, I can appreciate the importance of new, innovative, clean technologies in mining. Anna Michelle, did you want to come in on this?
I just wanted to say that, you know, I mean, if you've read this IRMA study, you'll see that it's got 14 mining projects, and it estimates that these would prime a downstream market of 400 billion euros and create 6 million jobs. So, I mean, that's, you know, that's kind of a poster of what we're talking about. But I want to also echo, aside from Peter's points, Vincenzo's points, that it's very important to stress what the quality of the, you know, what the description and what the quality of these jobs are, to change in people's minds. You know, yes, I do want my kid to work. You know, if you ask me, you know, do you want your kid to work in a mine? Then that's not exactly what you dream of as a parent. But if you say, you know, oh, I'd like my, you know, my child to be an innovator and a business person and have a startup that has to do with mining, and you're not imagining him or her going down a shaft into the earth, digging out stuff with their hands, then that's a different situation. So I think that there's plenty of room for a good campaign on jobs, on quality, and on the narrative altogether.
Yes, thank you very much. We have a couple of questions that have come in, so I think I will try to summarize these briefly. One is about the new EU battery regulation. And the question is, how can this new regulation help incentivize new sustainable battery supply chains and practices? Maybe we'll let Peter and Anna Michelle comment on that. And then we'll go on and see if there's some other questions that need to be raised.
Yeah, so the batteries thing is now, we've made a proposal, and it's with Anna Michelle and her colleagues at the Parliament and also at the Council. So the core principle is that we want to create the enabling framework for a clean, sustainable batteries value chain to develop in Europe, right? Because we cannot compete on pure cost with the Asian battery cell manufacturers. It's never going to happen. So we have to compete on what do we value, and we value sustainability, we value responsible, ethical sourcing of the battery raw materials, we value maximizing intelligent design for circularity, we value really pushing hard on the recovery and the recycling. So we're going to set ambitious recycling rates for the battery raw materials when batteries come to the end of their life. And we want to push that you have minimum standards of recycled content going into the batteries that will be made a few years down the road. So taking all those things together, and of course the safety and the performance of battery goes without saying, that's what we're trying to achieve. And we're also open to the fact that today's battery will change. There'll be new technologies, new mixes coming along. So it's a framework which can adapt over time as new technologies come out of R&I and into commercialization.
Yeah, can I just come also to a bit more on the finance? There seems to be a lot of finance. Mark, you've mentioned also the importance of the taxonomy and the progress in Europe in terms of financing. Is there anything else that you think could be developed further, or any other element that needs to be pushed perhaps by policymakers, even at local level, in terms of making available finance?
I think the main issues are ones around speed. The rest of the world can commercialize and move towards building things very quickly, and there's just a disconnect between that and maybe the way some of the funding channels, how long they take, and the processes, the amounts of steps there. So I think that's what contrasts for me when I travel obviously around the world, working in all these different sectors, and when we work in Europe, it's just that you're told, well, you enter a process now and you might not get an answer for 12 months or something. I think the speed of decision making around some of those channels is the drawback in what is otherwise lots and lots of different good positive channels. I think also maybe there's making batteries is not actually a skill that's widespread in Europe. It's mostly been done in Asia, and it's hard to find people with experience of it, and those people certainly aren't necessarily going to be employed high up in, say, policy making positions, or different parts of the decision making process, even around the say the banks and the export credit agencies and the groups that might be involved in, or innovation type financing. If you don't have someone that actually knows about the real business, it's hard for them to, I think, see the plans and see the proposals for groups that want to help build these battery manufacturing supply chains. And so again, that leads to a lot of reticence. These are not your old world metals and mining. This is new age. There's a lot of innovation as well that's happening at the same time to make it better. But more importantly, it's the understanding of all the steps that go into them. They're complex, and they're built in layers that are normally hived out to lots of different groups. And so to bring those together, it seems very daunting to the groups in charge of maybe the decision making in the banks and the financing channels. So I don't know how you can fix that other than try and grab some people and get them over, very much like you'll see some of those aforementioned battery makers everyone's trying to employ people ex-Korea or Japan or China that knows something about batteries, but you do need that capability. Will help the decision making. That's a good way to help solve it.
I mean, the Europe, it wants to be at the forefront of addressing climate change. It wants to be at the forefront of driving forward the clean energy transition. So we have to also be at the forefront of these innovative developments and changes. And I think the graphene flagship was one example of where EU funding helped to push forward the frontiers of some of these new technologies and new ideas. And of course, Europe has been very innovative with lots of technology. The development into new business has not been quite as successful as it has been in some other parts of the world, particularly the United States. But I'm absolutely convinced there's a lot of potential to move forward.
Could I just come in on this, please?
Yeah,
Meg?
please do.
I just want to make three very quick points. One on adding to what Peter said. I mean, the battery regulation, there's two additional points. The one is, we also need to focus on the export. I mean, we need to focus on the export side, on controlling the waste streams and on the export of waste products. That's the first point. And the second is that this is an excellent example that is replicable. I mean, the way we've handled this, we can replicate. We don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. We can replicate it based on the same principles and pillars. And the third thing when it comes to the financing is that I just would like to focus on something I've been saying recently about the European Innovation Fund. As you all know, this fund has always been intended to focus on very innovative products, technologies, and these big flagship projects. But I think that we need to extend its eligibility to include supply chains that are critical to European electric vehicles manufacturing. I mean, electric vehicles are vital to this green transition, and they clearly align with these objectives. So in my opinion, we should all be pushing in that direction for the financing.
Couldn't agree more. Peter, you wanted to come in on that point as well.
Yeah, so in the Fit for 55 package, which we made in the summer, one of the proposals is a revision of the emissions trading system and a massive boosting of the innovation fund. So if there are MEPs like Anna Michel who think that the innovation fund needs to have a broader mandate to deal with Green Deal objectives, then you have the file on your desk at the moment. What I would like to say on the finance is there is a lot of money about, but there is an umbilical link between investment and the investment timeline and permitting. And there are certain stages where you're stuck waiting for some approval to come in, but you still need to advance your project. So that's maybe where we can help keep projects moving forward in the way that they need to. Because I don't want to put people like Mark under any kind of unreasonable pressure, but I know my commissioner, and I'm sure Anna Michel and other members of the European Parliament really expect to see some real change on the ground by the end of this political mandate. We want to see that we've left the European supply chains more resilient in a measurable way, reduced a dependency on single points of supply from outside, and with a more sustainable, demonstrably more sustainable value chains in the process.
I think Mark would agree with you entirely, and he's trying to get his project moving forward, but there are still some hurdles to leap. So isn't that true? So, we have to really move forward in these areas. If a project like the one that Talga is preparing and getting underway in northern Sweden were to fail, it would be a real tragedy because it has such potential for transforming the development of batteries in Europe, new, innovative, sustainable and secure development of batteries. Unfortunately, we're running out of time. Can I ask each of you to give a sort of 30-second overview of what you would like to see next and what we can do next in terms of going forward? Vincenzo, I'll start with you because you had a little less contribution time.
No worries. I'll be very brief. I think what we need to do is that we need to collectively understand that mining will be an increasingly important part of our economy, simply because if we want to decarbonize, that's and secondly that we can do mining in a way that is a lot more environmentally sustainable. There's a lot more acceptable also for local communities, and that creates jobs, good jobs, and good value chains around them. It is possible, it is technologically feasible, and it's also feasible from a business perspective, as Mark's company represents.
Great, thank you. Mark?
Look, ultimately, I think it comes down to continuing forums like this where you're commercial and political. I think it's needed to have a good fusion, because you're talking about a disruption to many decades of relaxation of just importing stuff, no matter how dirty it is. If we want things to be cleaner, we have to take responsibility. And that's not going to happen maybe that quickly. The responsibility we can bring to it, but you also need responsibility of the society from the local level all the way up to feel that responsibility for cleaning it up and being a part of the solution instead of continuing to import problems. That's I think what really that's where this really will kick in. But it will help if we all continue showing the realities of this situation and trying to get that shift to happen across society, so they'll support it, and that is how you'll get it done. And if you don't, you'll be stuck in the same dirty mess that you've got already, frankly.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Everyone has to do their part. Peter, can you?
Yeah, the day that China decides that it needs to keep all these raw materials and the processed materials for its own economic needs, we're going to be stuffed unless we've used the time we have now to build the resilience across our different value chains. Case study, magnesium. The Chinese stopped producing because they had energy shortages, and we're left with no magnesium. So we need to sit down and work out how we can build resilience case by case.
Thank you very much. Anna Michelle, last word to the Parliament.
Thank you, Megan. I think that we need to work together to build more positive narratives to reinforce the fact that critical raw materials are critical for the Green Deal, critical for the digital transition, and critical for the well-being of our societies, our economies, and our children in the future.
Very good. And here we have a wonderful opportunity to showcase Talga's very interesting and dynamic project in northern Sweden. Thank you so much to all of you and all of you for participating. And we look forward to seeing a lot more progress, Mark, from your society, from Vincenzo, and many thanks to your contributions, both from the Commission and the European Parliament. So we're a couple of seconds late, but thank you so much to everyone, and looking forward to seeing a positive, successful initiation of the plant, Mark, in the next time we meet. Thank you to all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Very much.
Bye.
Bye.